This presentation will focus on the topic of nonverbal communication and more specifically, the functions of nonverbal communication. When we consider the functions of nonverbal communication, what we're really focusing on is what role does nonverbal communication take in our interactions as far as helping us to understand others, decipher messages, interpret and decode messages, as well as encode the messages that we send. Our textbook interplay identifies 5 key functions of nonverbal communication. These are creating and maintaining relationships, the use of nonverbal communication for regulating our interactions, how we use nonverbal behaviors to influence others, nonverbal communication and how we use it to either conceal or deceive, and finally our use of nonverbal communication for managing impressions. Let's start by looking at nonverbal communication and its use for creating and maintaining relationships. Every relationship we have, throughout the course of the relationship, nonverbal communication and behaviors play an important role. We extract a lot of information based on the nonverbal cues of other people, whether this is through eye contact or lack of eye contact, how close they sit or stand to us or how far away, the facial expressions they use, the type of clothing they wear. These are all nonverbal cues that give us an indication about the other person and about how they feel toward us at any particular time. A lot of information is extracted based on nonverbal behaviors. Let's look at the roles of nonverbal behaviors early in relationships. When you consider a situation when you're interacting with someone for the very first time, maybe it's someone you see in a classroom on the first day of class, or someone in your workplace on your very first day of work, or someone who's new to your workplace, or maybe even someone that you're interested in romantically. How do we act non-verbally to initiate the conversation or put ourselves in a position to interact with that other person? Well, there's a few things we can do. First, we might use direct eye contact. We all know that when someone makes direct eye contact with us, it definitely captures our attention, even if just for a brief moment. But simply the act of making direct eye contact with someone gets their attention. We also might try to situate ourselves so that we're in close proximity to that person. In a classroom, for example, you may select the desk that's right in front or right beside the person that you want to interact with. In social situations, people are often situated in groups, so you may try to position yourself so that you are in close proximity to the group where the person you want to interact with is standing. In addition to these, facial expressions like a smile is an indicator of willingness or desire to interact with another person. And in addition to initiating contact and communicating positive messages, our nonverbal communication can also communicate a lack of willingness to interact with others. When we don't want to interact with someone, we will likely decrease eye contact. Our facial expressions may not be welcoming, or we may position our bodies by turning away from the other person to avoid interaction. The second function of nonverbal communication is the use of behaviors to regulate interaction. Regulators are cues that we use to help manage our conversations. And another way to think about regulators is they are things we use to indicate turn-taking during our conversation. Often these cues are communicated non-verbally. Think about what we do to indicate to another person in a conversation that our turn is coming to an end and it's going to be their turn to speak. We often use our voices to communicate these cues. So when we come to the end of a statement, and we're ready for the other person to speak, pay attention to what happens to the tone of our voice. I provided that extended pause to give you a chance to think about what happened. We often indicate through nonverbal cues of the voice, or what we call paralanguage, that our turn for speaking is over and someone else's turn to speak. Some of the things we do are at the end of the statement our tone will lower, our rate of speaking will decrease, and the volume of our voice will decrease until it comes to a gradual stop. The other person likely picks up on these cues and understands we're finished talking and it's their turn to speak. The other way we may indicate this is by asking a question. What do we do different with our voices at the end of a statement when we ask a question? As you may have just heard, in that example, when we ask a question, the tone and pitch of our voices typically go up at the end of a statement. These are cues that we're all aware of and probably not even cognizant of, but there are subtle nonverbal things that we do to indicate turn-taking in our conversations. Some other regulating behaviors include briefly breaking eye contact with the other person at the end of the statement, or if you're sitting in a chair, when you come to the end of a statement, you may lean back. Now let's look at how we use nonverbal communication to influence others. When we want to get somebody to do something for us, what are some things that we might do to encourage or influence them? Often it can be a very simple thing, like a light tap on the shoulder or touch on the arm. These types of behavior have been proven to boost compliance. It's also been indicated that appropriate eye contact in social situations can increase other people's perceptions of us as far as liking or affinity. We may also use nonverbal communication as a means for generating or communicating power. One example of this is a classroom and how a classroom in a traditional college or high school is set up. Most of the time there's several desks or tables. All of those desks or tables and chairs are facing one direction and usually facing the front of the room. If there's a blackboard or a whiteboard, the tables and chairs are facing that. This is also typically where the instructor will stand. This type of nonverbal communication, which deals with using the environment in a way to communicate that all interactions should flow through the front of the room where the instructor is, putting the instructor in a position of power, in a position to influence the interactions or behaviors of others. You can also think about if there's a small group of people sitting at a table and one person is standing up to speak, that speaker is elevating herself physically above the other people, which puts her in a position of power. A lot of research on nonverbal communication is also focused on how we use nonverbal behaviors to conceal information or be deceptive. Some social scientists believe the majority of the messages we exchange are not 100% truthful, that there's often some sense of concealing information. Maybe we're attempting to conceal emotions or attitudes, or maybe even being intentionally deceptive. It's not as easy as you may think to tell when someone's lying, but we can point to some nonverbal behaviors that may indicate deception. First of all, research indicates that liars demonstrate more speech disturbances, meaning they may stumble over their words more frequently, or they may pause more frequently, or even repeat themselves. Researcher Paul Ekman, whose research is the basis for the television show Lie to Me, discusses unconscious micro-expressions, brief lapses of eye contact, or very quick changes in facial expression that are often indicators of our feelings or indicators of whether or not we're being honest. However, be cautious of trying to interpret nonverbal behaviors to determine if someone's telling the truth or not, because, as discussed earlier in the textbook, nonverbal communication is very ambiguous and can be interpreted in a variety of different ways. Our final nonverbal communication is the use of nonverbal communication to manage impressions. We discussed impression or identity management earlier in the interplay text, and we know we all want people to like us or look at us favorably. We want others to have a positive impression of us, and we may use nonverbal behaviors to create these impressions. Maybe you've heard the saying, people will believe more what you do than what you say. So our nonverbal behaviors are extremely important in creating impressions. Three different things we look at with regard to the use of nonverbal communication and managing impressions are manner, appearance, and setting. Our manner deals with the way that we act. Some may use the phrase, it's how you carry yourself. Manner includes body movements, eye contact, and facial expressions. Do our facial expressions and body position appear welcoming and communicate a positive disposition? Another thing not to overlook in manner is our use of paralanguage. One way to illustrate this that I think everyone will understand is we all have what we call our telephone voice. I've noticed this with my own family members. Whenever my wife or children take a telephone call from someone like a boss or a teacher, anyone who's not a close friend, there's a different voice that they use. I think we all do this. We use a voice to make ourselves sound nicer and more outgoing than we normally would. Appearance includes how we dress. Clothing says a lot about who we are. We can consider different classifications like casual dress, business casual, formal attire, semi-formal attire. We need to consider if our style of dress is appropriate to the environment we're in. In addition to dress, there's artifacts, the different things that we carry around with us. Some common artifacts that we may use are backpacks, purses, and jewelry. There are huge industries for each of these items because manufacturers realize many people use these items as an expression of nonverbal messages and expressions of identity. They communicate messages of wealth, status, power. Finally, the setting refers to the physical items that we surround ourselves with. Where we live is a big part of our setting. Think about your home. What does your home look like, or your apartment, or your dorm room? How do you decorate those areas? And what does that say about you? Also, things like our vehicles. Vehicles say a lot about us. What type of vehicle do we drive? What messages do our vehicles carry about success, or status, or power? This concludes the discussion of the functions of nonverbal communication and how nonverbal behaviors may be used for creating and maintaining relationships, regulating interactions, influencing the behavior of others, concealing and deceiving, and managing identity.